Good day, welcome. Welcome to today's web talk from the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation, Tracing the Anti-Semitism Virus Over the Centuries and Why Humanity Tolerates It. Bit of a provocative title, but I think you'll find that our speakers can very much handle it. I'm Andrea Spindle, Executive Director of the CAEF and today's moderator. The Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation is a registered charity based in Toronto, focused on education about anti-Semitism and its latest very virulent iteration, anti-Zionism. We work to counter the negative, dishonest narratives about Israel and provide the historical and legal truth about Jewish rights to the land of Israel. The battle for hearts and minds is a battle for truth over fiction, justice over evil, and as we will hear today, it is not about an abiding postmodern ideology of tolerism or excessive tolerance of what is intolerable. Before I introduce our two speakers, let me just explain the format for today. Each of our speakers will provide a presentation of their major thesis in relation to our topic, and then I will start with a few questions to each of them, but you are welcome to also send questions through the Q&A function on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And I will direct them to the speakers or speaker that you wish. And today's program will be recorded and posted on our website for anyone who wishes to hear it again or who missed it today. You're also invited to support the work of our foundation. You can donate at the website. Our website address is very simple, caef.ca. We are working to end the annual hate fest at Canadian universities, the Israel Apartheid Week phenomenon, when we hope you will support this endeavor and the programs that we're bringing you through our web talk and bulletins. Now I have the honor of introducing our two guests, both of whom are very critical thinkers. Both Howard Rotman and Diane Bederman have done a great deal of analysis of historical ideas and their implications for humanity and how certain sources have impacted prevailing ideologies, contributing to the past and present rise of anti-Semitism. Howard Rotman is a lawyer, social enterprise developer, and an author, as well as the founder of the publishing house Mantua Books. Howard has stated that he founded the company to disseminate important ideas meant to save the West, Israel, and the Jewish people from ideological and physical assault perpetrated by the many international dictators, terrorists, and propagandists in league with fundamentalist Islam. Howard has lived his principles, being one of the few people who stood against the University of Toronto's failure to take a moral stand against the annual anti-Israel hate fest called Israel Apartheid Week, leading to his returning his 2 degrees from that university. First, I applaud him. We share his goal of eliminating this event from campuses across the country. Howard's writing includes a novel and several books and articles for various magazines such as the New English Review, Jewish Voice of New York, and Front Page Magazine, covering topics such as the political culture in Canada, tolerism, and submission, all of which you will hear him address today. Diane Biederman has an education in science and humanities and is a trained hospital chaplain. She is a journalist, blogger, and public speaker, covering topics such as religion, ethics, politics, and mental health. She has written for various media, including the Huffington Post Canada, Times of Israel, and the Chesterton Review, and her book, The Serpent and the Red Thread, The Definitive Biography of Evil, was published by Mantua Books, and I understand has been accepted and distributed through Yad Vashem and the American Holocaust Museum, and I highly recommend it and Howard's book. Diane is also a member of the board of Hasbara Fellowships Canada. So I'm delighted to have both of these esteemed writers and thinkers with us. And we'll begin with Diane giving her history of anti-Semitism.
Thank you, Andrea. So, is anti-Semitism a virus? It sure acts like one. I'm going to take you on a scientific journey of anti-Semitism from the first actor, patient zero, Amalek, the one who attacked the weakest of the Jews as they made their way out of Egypt after 400 years of to the Promised Land to the present, most recent Amalek. In the 11th century BCE, King Saul was told by God to kill the entire tribe of Amalek. Saul could not do it, and so the Amaleks continued through time, the eternal spreader of the virulent virus. I have no doubt the carriers, many may have been asymptomatic, are able to trace and connect to the major spreaders. Purim, we remember Haman, 4th century BCE, the one who incited the king of Persia to annihilate the Jews, to wipe them off the face because Mordecai refused to bend the knee. We can trace the 2,000-year-old Christian anti-Semitic pandemic to the death of Jesus and Paul to Damascus, which spread the virus everywhere. The church between Jews and Christians during the early 3rd century. They denied the Jews the right to hold public office, and Constantine, who made Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire, declared that the Jews were to be included among the horde of evildoers to be vanquished, as he saw the of prophets and murderers of the Lord. By the Jews were not allowed to employ Christian servants, nor were they allowed during Passover week, Passion Week, lockdown. Meanwhile, a new hotspot emerged, Islam. In the 7th century, soon after Muhammad, a prophet, expelled 2 tribes of Jews from today's Arabia in 625 and 624. In 620, Muhammad committed the tribe of the Banu Qurayza, a peaceful community of farmers, the last remaining major tribe of Jews in Medina. It's reported that more than 800 men and boys who had surrendered were brought in batches to trenches that had been dug for them. Forced to stand over the trenches, they were then beheaded. Appeasement only breeds contempt. In 628, Muhammad conquered Khaybar, murdering the leaders and taking a wife, Safiya, after beheading her husband, Kanana al-Rabi of the Bani Nadir. The calls of Khaybar echo today with the chant, Jews, remember Khaybar. The army of Muhammad is returning. Over 14 centuries, Islam spread the virus throughout Europe, North Africa, and now North America. Back to Christianity. In the 7th century, the 12th Synod of Toledo, Spain, declared the burning of Jewish books acceptable. By the end of the 7th century, Christians were told not to access medical care from Jewish doctors. In the 11th century, Christians were forbidden from living in Jewish homes. In 1078, the Synod of Gerona made it an obligation for Jews to pay taxes to support the church to the same extent as the Christians. The Third Lateral Council forbade Jews from being witnesses or plaintiffs against Christians. This virus knew no boundaries. In 1190, the mobs in England, aroused by the mighty Crusades who spread the virus throughout their travels, massacred the Jews of Norwich and then those in Stamford, in Bury St. Edmunds, Lincoln, Lynn, and then the Jews of London. In 1215, the Fourth Lateral Council decreed that Jews must mark their clothing to publicly designate their religion. Echoes of Islam in the past. In 1222, the Council of Oxford prohibited the construction of new synagogues, and in 1267, the Synod of Vienna prohibited Christians from attending Jewish ceremonies. That same year, the Synod of Breslau made Jewish ghettos compulsory, quarantine. There were the pogroms of the 13th century in Frankfurt and Rotenberg in the state of Bavaria, in Pforzheim and Speyer, the murders of Jews in Mainz and Krakow on Passover, 1283, the burning of the young and old in Munich, 1285, the murder of Trebach and the murder of Kameno near Dusseldorf, and the murder of Bonn. A Christian converting to Judaism was decreed heresy by the Synod of Mainz in 1310, and in 1434, the Council of Basel denied Jews the ability to obtain academic degrees. As the Muslim domain fell in Europe, the Catholic world took hold again. Nothing interfered with this virus. The Inquisition began with the condemning and burning of the Talmud. In 1288, the first mass burning of Jews took place in France and spread in Spain. Tomás de Torquemada, the Spanish Amalek Grand Inquisitor and super virus spreader, presided over the death of more than 2,000 Jews burned at the stake, auto de fe, under Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. It's estimated that 32,000 heretics were murdered the same way by the time the Christian killing spree in Europe ended. In 1348, accused of causing the Black Plague, that should sound familiar today, Jews were murdered in Mainz and then Oppenheim, Frankfurt, Erfurt, Cologne. Many were buried in a common grave, and of all places, Worms. Then in 1391 came the extinction of the Jewish community in Majorca and the killing in Barcelona. Jews in the 15th century in Breslau and the marketplace in Berlin were accused of desecrating the host. The Jews of Trent were accused of killing a Christian boy to use his blood in the making of matzah for Passover. In 1516, the Jews of Venice were pushed into a community, a ghetto, surrounded by water with only a bridge connecting the ghetto to the rest of Venice. More isolation. The bridge was guarded by a Christian watchman to ensure that no one left during the night. The Jews could leave the ghetto only after the morning tolling of the bell and only when wearing a yellow tunic and hat, a scarlet letter. In 1555, Pope Paul IV ordered the Jews of Rome into a ghetto and decreed that they too be marked by wearing a yellow star to separate them from the others. Government decreed social distancing. In the 16th century, Martin Luther, the reformer, another in a long line of reformers, declared, in short, the Jews are worse than devils. Unlike COVID-19, this virus wiped out Jewish children in Rome and throughout Italy, Switzerland, Germany, when the Passion Plays led to the screaming for Jewish blood. There was the massacre of Jews by Cossacks and the Poles in the 17th century, led by the Russian tyrants Chmielnicki and Krivonos. Children killed at their mother's breast or roasted alive on spits over the fire. And pogroms throughout Russia in the 19th and 20th centuries. The virus was powerful and all-consuming. Then this toxic virus erupted in Europe in the 1930s, which led to the Holocaust. More than 6 billion Jews were erased from the earth in gas chambers and by bullets. 300,000 Jews had been brutally massacred in the Vilna regions and Lithuania Kaunas, often shot in the back while standing over open pits, reminiscent of the Jews in Medina. Ultimately, 1.5 to 2 million Jews were annihilated from this Holocaust by bullets by the Einsatzgruppen and other units of the witnessed by their neighbors who did nothing. In 1943, at the peak of the Holocaust, under the sight or willful blindness of Pope Pius XII, the Jews of Rome were gathered into a ghetto on the banks of the Tiber, and then on October 16, 1943, were dragged from their homes, loaded onto trucks, transported to the barracks of Collegio Militare, a mere half-mile from the Vatican, and then deported to the gas chambers of Auschwitz and Birkenau. Now, one would have thought the virus would be exhausted, but no, we can contact trace directly from Hitler to Amin Al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. Hajj Amin Al-Husseini worked to unite the Arabs with the Nazis economically and ideologically in an anti-Jewish Islamic movement across India to Central Europe and on to the Middle East. The Arab Higher Committee broadcast nightly incendiary hate messages, beginning with words, "Oh Muslims," and undertaking all things calculated to advance a German victory, which promised an Arab state in Palestine and a disappeared Jewish population. No wonder the Arab marketplaces were filled with posters that declared, "In heaven, Allah is your ruler. On earth, it is Adolf Hitler." They cried, "We, the Palestinian nation, our fate from Allah is to be in the vanguard in the war against the Jews until the resurrection of the dead. As the Prophet Muhammad said, the resurrection of the dead will not arrive until you will fight the Jews and kill them." And those calls continue to today, as the virus, having been relatively quiet following the mass murder of Jews, returned with a vengeance in the 21st century. It had morphed over time from a predominantly anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish virus to an anti-Zionism virus as Israel grew and prospered. Contact tracing is almost impossible, but we know it spread with the latest Amalek, Barack Hussein Obamalek. For the first time in the history of the relationship between America and Israel, an American president, Obama, refused to stop a resolution against Israel made by the United Nations Security Council in 2016, Resolution 2334, one of more than 75 resolutions against the Jewish state that declared Jewish communities in Judea, Samaria as illegal. Jerusalem, the eternal capital of Israel, thousands of years, no longer the Jewish capital. The wailing Western Wall, where the Jews for generations cried over the destruction of the great Second Temple while praying for its rebuilding, no longer a Jewish place, putting Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East, the people who gave the world the ethic that underpins all democracies, at greater risk of attack. Obama opened the floodgates to the Jew haters on the left, uniting them with the Jew haters on the right. Here are a few of the world leaders who have spread this virus. Vice President Federica Mogherini of the European Union, Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party in Great Britain, Linda Sarsour, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Bernie Sanders, Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, and most of the Democratic Party in America. Swedish PM Sven Löfven and his foreign minister, Margot Wallström, Ireland's President, Michael Daniel Higgins, and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Simon Carberry-Coveney. They have all condemned Israel when given the opportunity. The virus seems to have settled in Canada's Prime Minister Trudeau as well, as he compares Israel to Iran and North Korea. And in Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, now officially standing with boycott, divest, and sanction, the anti-Semitic movement. It is Obama's friend, Louis Farrakhan, who was a frequent guest at Obama's White House, who is the leader of the Nation of Islam, who has been a super spreader, as Islam is now the major hotspot worldwide for this virus. He preaches, Hitler is a very great man, and don't you forget, when it's God who put you in the ovens, it's forever. Satanic Jews have infected the whole world with poison and deceit. There are accusations of Israel as an apartheid state on par with South Africa. Calls for boycott, divest, and sanction of the only democracy in the Middle East are heard across university campuses around the world. McGill, McMaster, York, and Ryerson in Canada, to UC Davis, New York University, and Columbia in America, Exeter and Oxford in Britain, and a rise in Jew hatred across Germany, while the sales of Hitler's Mein Kampf are rising astronomically and spreading the virus. Today, we are witnessing attacks on synagogues and Jewish neighborhoods in the name of Black Lives Matter, supporters of BDS. This was reported in the Jerusalem Post. Masks, hoodies, sledgehammers, crowbars, baseball bats. These are the descriptions Jewish business owners cited when talking about how their stores were looted and ransacked, and synagogues were vandalized with graffiti after peaceful protests spiraled out of control in Los Angeles, beginning on Friday night and continuing unto the weekend. 50 or 60 looters had arrived at a jewelry plaza in a downtown Los Angeles between 1 and 3 a.m. on Saturday morning and broke all the glass. The windows were shattered, the iron gates broken into. Kristallnacht repeated. Booths had been overturned, silver stolen. Congregation Beth Israel in the Fairfax district of the city was spray painted with phrases, F Israel and Free Palestine. It seems the virus does not discriminate, able to find hosts of many colors, religions, and genders. And again, this virus is spreading in the churches, the same holy places that turned a blind eye to the death camps in Europe. They now support BDS, the Anglican Church in Britain, the Pentecostal appeal promoting the view that Israel is an apartheid state and is eradicating the history of the Arabs, the Mennonite Church, USA, the Presbyterian Church, USA, the Church of Scotland, the United Church of Canada, and the Latin Patriarchate of Jerusalem. The virus spreads rapidly through these congregations. And let us not forget mainstream media all over the world is spreading the virus. Too many organizations like the CBC, CNN, MSNBC, BBC, the New York Times, the Toronto Star, the Washington Post promote left-wing narratives of vicious anti-Semitism. And then, of course, there is social media. So here we are, fighting a super virus that refuses to die. We must remain on alert. We must be ever vigilant with contact tracing. In 465 BCE, Mordecai told Esther, if you remain silent now, salvation for the Jews will come from some other place, and you and your father's house will perish.
Thank you. Wow. Lots to think about. We'll get back to you, Diane. Thank you very much. Howard?
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Diane. The virus that our people have been subject to, as set out by you, is so incomparably more serious than the coronavirus, which has almost destroyed our country. And we appreciate your tracing it as a virus. The other part of the title of today's talk is Why Humanity Tolerates Anti-Semitism. So I'm a lawyer and a historian, and so I like to look at words and parse their meanings to make sure that we really know what we're talking about. So the first part of this is humanity. And I thought, what does humanity actually mean? Humanity refers to people who have compassionate, sympathetic, or generous behavior or disposition, and the quality of being humane. So one has to ask whether people today are all part of humanity, or a lot of them have descended into something else. And it's what I call the leftist, Islamist, globalist alliance. I think we all know what they are. I've decided to put them together because so many of the people who espouse one naturally espouse all three. We know what globalism is, or should know what it is. It refers to an ever-increasing number of non-governmental organizations and leftist-oriented political regimes to seek a new world order or a unification of countries under people like Bill Gates and Obama, who will not be subject to the sovereign masses of their individual countries, but can carry on with this virus and with anything else they choose to do. And globalism, being that it centers on the United Nations and other such organizations which have historically been just horrible to Jews and Israel, we see that globalism as something truly to fear and to try to work against. Islamism, we understand the word Islamism to be slightly different than the word Islam. Islam being a religion which, to be sure, has many problems with it, many parts that are anti-Semitic or anti-woman or anti-Christian. We do support many people who are now working from within the community, not enough perhaps, but many who are working to try to cleanse the Islamic religion from the attributes of Islamism, which include the conquest and creation of a worldwide caliphate, imposing Sharia law, terrible persecution of gays and women and Jews and Christians. All of those things. We have some brave authors who are writing against it and looking to reform Islam. It's a controversial area. There are many good writers on both sides. I particularly follow Salim Mansour, our great author, emeritus professor in London, Ontario. Daniel Pipes I follow, and we try to work against Islamism anyway, as it attempts to create its power through violence, through symbolism, through intellectuals, and the raw exercise of power against our land. So we have, of course, the leftists, which Diane touched upon at the end, and I'll return to in a bit. But the leftist Islamist globalist alliance is something we should always keep in our mind. We have to concentrate on the ideologies. This is, I'm a child or son of a father who was a Holocaust survivor. He was slave labor in Auschwitz. His parents, my grandparents, were killed in the gas chambers there, as was his then 8-year-old sister, my then aunt of 8 years old. So I always grew up understanding innately the function of ideology. How could German people who seem so tolerant, seem so Western, seem so cultural, how could they descend into this pit, moral pit of killing Jewish babies for sport and all the other horrible aspects of the Shoah? So I came from a father who survived the Holocaust. My mother, however, was fortunate enough to grow up in Brantford, Ontario. And I had two very distinct sides of my family. And I began to understand that to understand what happened to the Rotenberg side of the family, that I really had to understand the issue of ideologies. Growing up, the only books I could find in high school about the Shoah were books about the war, the military aspects, like Shearer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. They didn't tell me anything. So I went to university and found a professor who specialized in ideologies, political culture, and values, and I was his protege. He was my mentor. And 20 years into practicing law, we hit 9/11, and we hit the increasing anti-Semitism. And at that point, I had to start writing. And then after writing 4 books, or during the course of writing the 4 books, I began to participate in publishing books from other great authors like Diane Bederman, from authors from Israel, from the United States, from Canada, from England, from France, from Italy. So this is all based on an understanding that we have to be careful about things that become ideologies and how they're used. And the ideology of excessive tolerance, I call tolerism. That's my name that I've given it to. And excessive tolerance can create tremendous problems. It's all got to do with what is the proper extent of tolerance. How far can we go? And I began to read a great philosopher named Karl Popper, and he was quite a pacifist and leftist before the Second World War. And after the war, and he saw what happened, he no longer was a pacifist, and his views of tolerance began to change. So let's talk about tolerance because it gives me a kind of microscope where I can examine people who profess to have certain ideologies or values and see what it is that they're really saying and what are they really valuing, and do we have to be afraid of them? Because in many cases we do. To be tolerant of something, you have to have 3 conditions. You must have a negative judgment about the thing. You must have the power to negate the thing, but you must deliberately refrain from negation of this thing. In other words, we tolerate pain, we don't tolerate pleasure. So we're looking for things that really make us feel uncomfortable, and what do we do about it? And Karl Popper said, if we extend unlimited tolerance, even to those who are intolerant, if we're not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed, and tolerance with them. We should therefore claim in the name of tolerance the right not to tolerate the intolerant. So that's the basic start to a book that I wrote called Tolerism, The Ideology Revealed. And you'll see there's a picture here of a dove trying to give an olive branch to a vulture that's hiding a bomb behind it, which of course we all understand what the intent of that picture is. So the definition of tolerance and the ideology of tolerism are most important. And Merriam-Webster, a dictionary, defines tolerance as a sympathy or indulgence for beliefs or practices differing from or conflicting with one's own. And we all, I think, agree that sympathy for the human condition is a nice idea, but what about indulgence? This is where we begin to get dicey. Indulgence is defined as giving free rein or taking unrestrained pleasure in gratifying or yielding to and treating with excessive leniency, generosity, or consideration those who are intolerant. So indulgence and leniency begin to pose a problem. The concepts of political correctness, moral equivalency, and moral and cultural relativism, all based on the postmodernism that infected the universities and first came from the Frankfurt School of basically Jewish left-wing German intellectuals. This contaminated the universities to such an extent that with the cultural upset of the late 1960s and early 70s, the moral relativism and anti-Israelism and anti-Semitism that came along with it became a huge problem. So I have trouble with the elevation of tolerance to the highest value of Western civilization and the extent to which it leaves us open to tolerating what should be intolerable. And so we have many Jews who are big on tolerance. And even we've got the people in California from they have the Wiesenthal Center. They have something called the Museum of Tolerance. And, you know, I just wonder whether the late Simon Wiesenthal, who devoted his life to bringing justice, not tolerance, bringing justice to ex-Nazis, how he would feel to have his institution host a museum of tolerance. So you can see the types of problems we get into. And the basic underlying reason for this tolerance is that people have abandoned the religious concepts of good and evil and failed to view beliefs and practices so inimical to what we should view as fundamental human rights as evil, but instead indulge them, treat them with excessive leniency. So again, we have carrying through on tolerance. Let me just give you this ideology, which again in our discussion today is key to understand why humanity or some people are tolerating anti-Semitism, because they've fallen into an ideology of tolerance, and excessive tolerance becomes tolerism, and tolerism eventually becomes what I call submission. So here's the more recent book, which is a sequel to the first book. And what we have here, the picture is intended to show from a house of tolerism, various ideologies come into play, which I call cultural masochism, empathy, pacifism, Islamophilia, which is the love of all things Islam, which we often see amongst the leftists, denialism, inclusive diversity, which is our Prime Minister's favorite value, Trumpophobia, which you can see in CNN and all the other places that have gone nuts in their phobia of Mr. Trump, pacifism, and these sort of things. So what I do in these books, if I don't have time to do it all today, is to examine all these ideologies. Now, some of the things that we see with tolerism is the abnormal respect given to international bodies like the UN, even though the human rights committees of the UN have been led by such human rights luminaries as Syria and Libya, and the Durban conference that was so horrible that was supposed to be a conference about racism, and was hijacked by Mary Robinson, who was later given the Medal of Honor by Obama. That was hijacked into an anti-Israel, anti-Semitic event. We give, because of tolerism, we give respect and a free ride to all these non-governmental organizations, which are really problems. And we have in a Jewish community, we have our own. We have Bend the Arc, we have Jewish Voice for Peace, we have J Street, we have even J Space now that invites Peter Beinart to come and lecture. So even they're part of that. We also pretend there's no world war ongoing by what we call the jihadists. To pretend that there's no world war when all evidence shows that there's a world war is a matter of tolerism. We also have the tolerists repeating ad nauseum about how bad America is, how bad its foreign policy is. The great Dennis Prager, he's challenged this head on. He said that America is not racist. He said it's the least racist of all the major countries, if you look at it carefully. He said it comes from the fact that first the left killed God, and then now they're killing man. And that the moral chaos that we're seeing on the streets of big cities now, moral chaos is bad for Jews. Because that moral chaos starts to have a denial of important values, such as not stealing. The media doesn't seem to have a problem with people saying they're so bugged about racism, so-called, that they feel justified to steal or all the other things we talked about. Okay, we're also seeing that there's the view of China and its military support that it gave to Sudan that enabled the Darfur's genocide. Everybody's tolerant of that too. We're upholding now through the tolerance prohibitions against racist and sexist comments against every possible group in the world, no matter how minor the allegations are, except for Orthodox or conservative Jews, and except for American white male redneck evangelical Christian gun owners. So everybody else is subject to tolerism, but not those. So we're also concerned with the tolerants who are tolerating illiberalism throughout. And we see how they were so tolerant, Obama and his friends, with the Iranian efforts to get a nuclear bomb, which they'd been promising since 1996, that when they got it, they would use it against Israel to demolish Israel. So the idea was to set it back a few years, and this was to be tolerant. It was not tolerance, it was tolerism. Okay, so I just want to finish up on leftism. If I'm not running too late here, let me just say that the leftists hate capitalism, they hate good, they tolerate evil, they hate America, they hate Jews. Black Lives Matter supports the BDS movement. Bill de Blasio, the mayor, is an anti-Semite now. Jewish leftists we see. In Minneapolis, with its Jewish mayor, we have an anti-Semitic congresswoman in Olhan Omar, a large Somali community, and if the existing police force is defunded, this is the next thing we have to worry about. Who's going to replace it? May I suggest we are going to worry about them choosing a pro-Black and pro-Islamist police force that will be inherently anti-Semitic. Okay, so we won't go into any more of the contemporary problems of the left and what we're seeing in the protests now. But instead, I want to go back to tolerism and just discuss very quickly some aspects of it and some definitions that will help us to understand what we're talking about here. Okay, so in Canada now, our tolerism includes something our Prime Minister says is inclusive diversity. This really bugs the hell out of me, and it should bug you too. Because this guy who never graduated from university has decided that diversity is the overriding value. When I grew up, it was peace, order, and good government, and order included justice. Okay, so if he's going to bring in diversity, and that's the main thing, then is he going to bring in people who hate Jews? Because that's part of diversity. So there are some Muslim people who are Islamist and who hate Jews. Why should they be brought in here? So I have to worry that my grandchildren at Bathurst and Lawrence are going to be hit like some others do. Identifiably Jewish people in Toronto are abused now. So this inclusive diversity and multiculturalism, my friend Salim Mansour has written a wonderful book called Liberal Repudiation of Multiculturalism, and I would recommend that book. We got stuck with this concept through Pierre Trudeau and even Brian Mulroney, but it's really a part of cultural and moral relativism. Obviously, not all cultures are equal, but that's what our country now stands for. And whether you feel comfortable in a country like that, I'll leave to you, but I'm becoming increasingly less comfortable with tolerism and the postmodern war on Jews. Pacifism, okay? Starting around 68, the war in Vietnam, all the people became pacifists, okay? I couldn't understand this because, you know, my family was wiped out in the Holocaust. How can a Jew be pacifist? Anyway, Zionophobia. There's a great writer and professor from McGill University named Gil Troy. And if you get a chance to read my book, I quote about how he addresses all of the various phobias that exist towards Jews. We also have an ideology of denialism. We deny reality. You can see this all over the place, how we deny reality. And when you're subject to denial, it doesn't work long term because eventually reality hits. And when reality hits, what happens to denialists is they look around for who they can blame for the truth of this coming out. And who do they blame? You know. We have, of course, in the universities, Diane touched on it, the postmodernism, the banning and boycotting in the name of tolerism is, my book was banned, my first novel was banned. You can read an article about my joy at being banned by a Jewish-owned bookstore in an article I wrote called Banning something. If you just Google Howard Rotberg book banning, you'll find it. Okay, so we also have a large aspect of delusional thinking. We have a large aspect of masochism. Masochism is a self-hatred. Now we have this self-hating Jews, self-hating Americans. We see the marches. There, 2/3 of the people marching are self-hating white people. This whole aspect of white guilt. You can read the key book on white guilt is by Shelby Steele. There's also, he's a black conservative philosopher. So there are some really great writers in this field. Okay, I just want to finish up because am I getting close to the end here? Okay, so let me just finish up with a couple of definitions here. I'll try not to make it too long, but the problem is people don't understand the words they're using, and they don't understand the concepts, they don't understand the ideologies. So, sorry.
I have just a couple of questions, so we probably should introduce those now, if that's okay, Howard?
Okay, what I'll just do is tell you what I was going to talk about, because I don't obviously have enough time to do it, but we have, for example, if you studied Hillary Clinton and you studied some of the speeches that she made in the run-up, she would talk about how the most important things are respect and empathy. Okay, respect even for our enemies. So what does respect mean? I mean, this is totally bizarre.
Should I go into the question?
Okay, and also the whole aspect of empathy. We're supposed to be empathetic with people, to get into their head and understand them. But unless you have very solid values yourself, you're in danger of losing your own values by empathizing so much with the other. And this brings me to the other thing I write about, which is cultural masochism and the cultural Stockholm Syndrome, which is the Stockholm Syndrome came from those bank tellers who were held hostage in a bank in Stockholm. And after a while, they fell in love with their captors and said how wonderful they were and got married to them. So when one is held hostage by illiberals, like the Islamists, there's a tendency, there was a Fox News journalist who got captured by Hamas in Gaza and thrown in a cave somewhere and held face down and tortured and forced to convert to Islam, and he came out saying, well, yes, I was forced to do that, and they hit me a lot, but they're lovely people, they're wonderful people, and you must not judge them harshly. So this again is a whole aspect of masochism, empathy. We're even told by our Prime Minister that tolerance is not far enough. We should go beyond tolerance. So what is beyond tolerance? Beyond tolerance is submission. So basically my point in my most recent book, again, is that these ideologies, building on tolerism, have taken us to a point where we are submitting to the most evil, to the most illiberal, and the most intolerant. And so I'll leave it at that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, just time for a couple of questions. We only have 10 minutes, so we'll try to be succinct. So Diane, I'll throw the first question to you that someone has sent on the Q&A. Given what you've both spoken about, maybe you can give us your opinion as to why the majority of Jews in the US, and I suspect it's here too, vote for the Democrats or the Liberals.
That's the greatest question that's ever been asked. I'm beginning to think that it's like genetic. My mummy was a Democrat. My grandmummy was a Democrat. I don't think, and yet what makes it so odd is that the Democrats themselves were against the end of slavery, against the 13th Amendment, against the civil rights. I don't know who sold it, maybe John Kennedy. But the Jews, for some reason, seem to think that I think they think Republicans are white Nazis. That somebody's done a great job of selling the Republican, the right, as being neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and they're not. If anyone really has an answer as to why Democrats, please phone me. I'd like to share it, because I don't understand. It's like a death wish, because the Democrats today are the most anti-Semitic party that America has ever had.
Okay, thank you. Howard, you mentioned the word respect and tolerate. And I found it interesting that Ali Wiesel himself said, I don't like the word tolerate. Who am I to tolerate you? I prefer the word respect. I must respect you even if I don't agree with you. And in fact, my disagreement may be an expression of my respect for you. And if I truly respect you, don't I owe you my honesty? So my question is, do you think academics and or journalists today actually allow healthy disagreement as a sign of respect?
No, there's complete tolerance completely cut off people who don't agree with them. Tolerance is a one-way street as far as they're concerned. And if I can, the respect, are the Jews who vote for, I can't resist, I have to add on to what Diane said, that if you look during the Obama era, you'll see a complete change of Jewish values, a complete misunderstanding of what Judaism is. It became this kind of social construct of kind of tikkun olam, social justice. Instead of that, so if your main value in life is be socially just, and that's your religion, then it's very easy to be taken in by fraud artists like Obama, who was not who he said he was. So you stop doing the hard analysis, and you just say you embrace words like respect and empathy and other garbage words which you don't even understand, and which pave the way for another genocide of our people. Because this time, by virtue of by people who virtue signal, who tell you, want to give signals how virtuous they are, and what they're doing is they're supporting ideologies that are going to cause us to submit to our death.
Okay, I think a few people have put their hands up, but please use the Q&A function so I can see your questions. Diane, I have another question for you. A big tough one. Where do you think it's going? Do you see a way to expunge this anti-Semitism that you've described? How do we deal with this virus?
I've thought about this a long time. Richard Dawkins wrote about cultural memes. He said a cultural meme is something like you inherit, the way you inherit blue eyes. So for 2,000 years, the vast majority of people, there are 7.8 billion people on the planet, 2 billion Muslims, 2 billion Catholic and Christians, 14 million Jews. For 2,000 years, Christians have been taught to hate the Jews because we killed Christ. That's the story. Under Islam, Muhammad said that there'll be no future unless every Jew is killed. When you pass this down, generation after generation, millennia after millennia, Richard Dawkins would say there is an anti-Semitic cultural gene passed down in the family. And that if you just scratch a little bit and give that person an opportunity to hate Jews, they will. We had people saying after the Shoah, this can never happen again, this was horrible. But then with the rise of Israel, all those people, as the churches I mentioned, once again joined on the bandwagon. They had an excuse to scratch the itch of that anti-Semitic cultural meme. And as sad as this is for me to say, and I hope I'm wrong, I think as long as we have Jews, we will have anti-Semitism. And it's up to the Jewish people to fight back, to never give in, and to always speak up, because silence is collusion.
Okay, this might be the last question. I don't know, I might get two in, but one of the people listening has asked, how do we get to the younger generation, Howard? Given that they are, if they're at university, if you like, attracted to leftist social issues, if you like, how do we get to them? How do we bring them to?
We have to be unafraid to tell them the truth. But when their parents tell them lies, they think it's the universities that are telling them lies, which they do. But if they come from a family that has told them lies, that tolerance is important and we're Democrats because we're kind to other people, you got to tell the kids the truth, that the university is anti-Semitic and anti-Israelism. You know, there's a 3D test. Make sure you understand, your kids know what the 3D test is. That Sharansky said that when does anti-Israelism pass to anti-Semitism? When they use double standards, when they demonize, or they delegitimize. There's also the International Anti-Semitism Remembrance Organization. They have a definition of also anti-Semitism that includes anti-Israelism, which bugs the left-wing people. But it's our own people are selling our young people a bill of goods. And I find that those young people that come out and are turned on by the good organizations that exist there now. There's Daniel Corrin's organization, what's that one called? Hasbara, you're involved in that, sorry. So the other thing we have to tell our kids is, yes, you're going to have weapons training, because it's very easy for the anti-Semites. When your great-grandfather was in Poland and he was so afraid of everybody, and everybody knew he was afraid. From now on, let them all know we have guns. Let them know we're right-wing. Let them know we're allied with these Christian right-wings who accept Noahide laws and accept our values. We got to be tough. We got to be strong. We cannot be tolerant.
Okay, thank you. We have just 3 minutes, so before I wrap up and lose everybody, I want to thank both of you for being very powerful speakers and presenting incredibly provocative ideas for everybody to consider. There are a number of questions we didn't get to. One of the comments that I know someone wanted to make was about the need for us to be pro-Israel, outstanding spokespeople for Israel, defend Israel, but also get the narrative right. We have to spend more time talking about what Israel is and is not, rather than it's got beautiful beaches and it's a startup nation. I think we have a lot more homework to do there. I also want to invite those who are still with us to consider making a contribution, a financial donation to keep our little organization going, so we can bring you speakers like this and cover the IT and web support costs, and include hopefully more programming that will be of value to everyone. So thank you very much, both of you, and have a good day. Bye now.